Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Merle Massey. I'm the coordinator for the Undergraduate Research Initiative. One of the programs that I run here on campus is SURE, the Student Undergraduate Research Experience. And it's for students who are interested in becoming researchers or working as researchers now, or maybe taking a research class where they need a little bit of extra help and support around research skill development. Today, we have an excellent session. I'm looking forward to this one. I always learn from this as well. This is copyright and permissions for research publications. And today we have Kate Langrell, who's the copyright coordinator at the University of Saskatchewan Library. And as a historian, copyright and permissions is something that I've worked with quite often in publications and books that I've put forward, but I always still learn something in it. And for everyone who's never had to think about this before, the minute you post something to the web, it's a whole other experience. And so with that, I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to pass it over to Kate. Kate, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Merle. Yes, thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for coming. I just want to start by acknowledging that I'm joining today from Treaty 6 territory on the USask Saskatoon campus, and I'm here to talk about copyright and permissions for research publications. All right, so these are the main learning objectives for today. It's sort of, my hope is at the end of the session, you'll be able to determine some answers to these questions. How do I know if I need copyright permission to reuse another person's work in my research or publications? How to get copyright permission if you need it or when you need it? And where can you find materials that are sort of copyright friendly that you may be able to use without having to acquire copyright permissions, and also who to go to for help. So spoiler alert, one of those people is me, but I'll share some other thoughts on that as well. All right, so before we begin, I will share my standard copyright related disclaimer that the information I provide in this session does not constitute legal advice. I am not a lawyer. Also, the information that I'll provide is general, and of course I strive to be accurate, but different publishers and journals who you may work with in the future related to publishing, they may have different perspectives, practices, and policies like that differ from some of what I share today. It really depends. And that's just something I wanted to share. Several times you'll hear me say, you know, this is the information I have, but also you'll likely have to check with a publisher. I'm focusing, mostly on talking about copyright for text and images, but if there are other types of material or media that you're interested to learn about, please let me know in the chat. As Merle said, this session is being recorded, I believe, so will be available afterwards. And I'm also going to provide a copy of the slides that have some hyperlinks and things that you can check out, as well as just a 2-page handout that covers sort of the main information and materials from today. I'm happy to take questions as we go, but I'm also planning for there to be some time at the end for questions and answers as well. Okay, so also before we start, I just thought it might be nice to get to know the group a little bit. So if you would like to share in the chat, I was curious what subject or topic is your area of study or research. I'm going to try and see if I can see the chat somehow, but maybe not. Oh, there we go. Oh, I found it. Particle physics, cosmology, microbiome, atmosphere physics, psychology, trans health. Okay, Steam power's role in early 20th century Saskatchewan. History, yeah. Great, thank you. Okay, oh, and one more I see, anthropology and history, VR and AR tech. Awesome, exciting, all right. And also, if you're interested to share in the chat, what is something that you know or have heard about copyright? And what is something you'd like to learn? So you can share one or the other or both. Of course, we already have some learning objectives for the day, but if there's anything in particular you're interested in, oh yes, I see business and events management as well for study. And if you're here feeling like I don't know anything about copyright at this point, that's totally fine. I am going to go through some definitions and kind of base, some of the foundational information about copyright. Okay, we're thinking you need permission to use someone else's work. All right. What is the difference between trademark and copyright, if any? All right, great question. Yeah. Want to figure out what you don't know. All right. Sounds good. Yes. Okay. Copyright lasts past death, I think, right? That's right. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Yeah. All right. Keep them coming if you would like in the chat. I'm going to continue on just to make sure I don't run out of time. All righty. Okay. So I'm going to start with a few definitions just to get us with some foundational copyright knowledge. So copyright is basically what the word sounds like. It's the legal right that a person or entity has to create and distribute copies of something. And this legal right belongs to the copyright owner, sometimes referred to as the copyright holder of the material. In Canada, under Canadian copyright law, the first copyright owner of something is the creator. I just saw that was a question that someone had. I own the copyright of pieces I create, right? That's right. One exception to that is if you create something in the course of your employment. So if you've created something sort of during your hours of work and that's the employment agreement you have, it tends to be that your employer owns that, but that depends on your kind of employee agreement with them. First, normally the creator is automatically the copyright owner. There's no requirement to register in order for something to be copyright protected in Canada. And then sometimes the copyright is transferred to another entity, like a publisher. That happens semi-frequently, reasonably frequently in academic publishing. There can also be multiple copyright owners for one work. Let's say if you wrote a paper collaboratively with other students, you could all be co-copyright owners of that work. So what kinds of materials are protected by copyright? It's basically anything that is in some way fixed, so written down or recorded or filmed, and anything that is original and creative or complex enough. So nobody can own just a simple smiley face kind of picture, or like this star, this yellow star that I have here. I have shared some examples in the chat of types of things that you think are protected by copyright, types of materials, if you would like. Often when books, yes, yeah, books, written things, yeah, for sure. Yeah, so often when talking about copyright, these materials are referred to as works because that's what they're called in the copyright law. So you may hear me refer to third-party copyrighted works. Sometimes they're called proprietary works, and these are basically, yeah, just works that are copyright protected, that have a copyright owner. And like third party would be sort of, let's say you are publishing an article with a journal. So you're gonna have an agreement with the journal, but you aren't, and you want to, let's see, republish an image in your article. If you're not the copyright owner of it and the journal is not the copyright owner, those are two parties. The copyright owner is some other third party, right? So that's why it's called third party. Okay, so a copyright permission or a copyright license or copyright license agreement is a written, legally binding document that acts as a record of and proof of the allowances and also any restrictions or limitations agreed upon by a copyright owner of a work and a user or licensee for the use of a particular work. So in that same example, let's say you're wanting to republish someone else's image in an article, in your journal article, you would potentially need a copyright permission from the copyright owner. So you would be like the user or the licensee in that scenario. Okay, another useful thing I think to understand about copyright and copyright protection is that it's not black and white necessarily, as they say. It's not sort of something is entirely copyright protected or not copyright protected at all. There's a bit of a spectrum that we can talk about. So on the most restrictive kind of copyright end of things, we have fully all rights reserved copyright protected works. So some examples of things that tend to have this full copyright protection are most print materials like hard copy books and magazines, newspapers, these kinds of things. Also, a lot of website terms of use basically say that the material are all rights reserved. One kind of misconception sometimes about copyright and the internet is that because it's all, you know, publicly out there, that it's sort of free game to use open online things, which is not the case, which I'm going to talk a bit more about later as well. Okay, so still on the kind of more restrictive end, we have material that has some kind of traditional copyright license attached to it. So a good example here is a lot of the library electronic resources that are available through USask. There are more allowances, you know, kind of included, generally speaking, than the like full all rights reserved copyright protection, but still a fair bit of restrictions. I have an asterisk beside that there because sometimes the copyright owners or their representatives try to make the licenses even more restrictive than the law, but there are many librarians who work very hard to try to ensure that that doesn't happen, that the licenses, you know, that the library pays a lot of money, we pay a lot of money for, allow the USask community to make good use of the materials. Then heading on to the kind of a little more copyright friendly side, there are some materials that have open access licenses or open licenses. So has anybody heard of Creative Commons by chance? Yes. Okay. Yep, got a thumbs up there. Okay, so got a couple of people. Yeah, so Creative Commons is an organization which, and what they did is they created some different copyright kind of licenses for creators and authors to be able to attach with their work that allowed creators and authors to retain some of their rights, but also give like more user rights than traditional kind of all rights reserved copyright does. So I see Merle has popped in the chat there, the link to their website. And again, I'll be talking more about those Creative Commons licenses too. Okay, and lastly, on the least restrictive end, we have the public domain. So public domain is a kind of legal term for copyright free. Again, just I always very much emphasize that publicly available does not necessarily mean copyright free. But copyright does expire after a period of time. So that does happen. It is after death, as someone pointed out in the chat. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So on the red, orange, and kind of the left side of the spectrum, we do have the maximum or like fairly significant copyright protection, Creative Commons and other open access licenses. There's some copyright protection, and then public domain materials are free of copyright protection. All right. Before getting into publishing, I just want to mention a little bit about copyright and private research use of materials. So copyright laws don't just exist to protect only copyright owners and creators. There needs to be some balance to allow for certain uses, like limited uses and copying and distribution of materials for certain purposes. It just wouldn't be possible for us to be needing to contact copyright owners for every single paragraph or whatnot that we wanted to copy and use. So to that end, there is a section in Canadian copyright law, and there are similar sections in other copyright laws across the world as well. The Canadian one is called fair dealing, and it states basically that fair dealing for the purposes of research, private study, education, parody, or satire does not infringe copyright. There's another fair dealing section that also allows for criticism, review, and I'm gonna forget the last one, news reporting. Yeah, so those are the 8 fair dealing purposes. So as you can see here, it does not actually provide any detail about how to apply this fair dealing. Like, what does this mean? Kind of, it doesn't mean that if you use or distribute material for research purposes that, it's automatically fine, like that it's not a copyright infringement no matter what. It just means that if you're using something for research purposes, that it could be okay as long as it's fair. So in order to be able to actually apply this part of the copyright law, the university has guidelines about it. And there is, and I've hyperlinked here to an application document of like, how can you apply fair dealing to teaching and research. It includes some ideas of like how much of a book, for example, can you copy and distribute for research purposes. So for books, the general rule of thumb is like up to 10% or 1 chapter. And for journals, it's generally like 1 article from an issue of a journal. So those are a couple examples. Okay, we have to keep in mind too that for electronic resources, license restrictions and terms of use can kind of supersede these fair dealing allowances. So if there were very restrictive terms of use on like an ebook or something, it could disallow for that. But generally speaking, the USask library electronic resources, the licenses allow for that kind of limited fair dealing use of the materials for private research purposes. So for you to be able to send to a like research colleague. Okay. The one type of material I would recommend being extra careful about, even in using for private research purposes, are tests and measurement tools. So for example, let's say if you're studying psychology, you're doing a research study and you found an existing like, okay, social anxiety in teenagers, scale or something like this that someone's created, and you're wanting to distribute that to a group of research participants, even if you don't like republish it, it still may be required to get copyright permission in order to use it in that way. So we need to look for those. Yeah, be careful with those things. All right. I'll stop quick. Any questions? I see just to take a break, there's a couple of questions about creating a YouTube profile. All right. I think I'm gonna have to take a closer read of these when we get to the Q&A session at the end, but I have seen them. So I will absolutely talk about those later for sure. All right. So when we're thinking about things that factor into whether we need copyright permission to republish material, I meant to write republish on there, that someone else is the copyright owner for, or that someone else created, there are 3 key questions that can help with this. I'm going to kind of show you all of them, and then I'm going to talk about each in a bit more detail. Okay. Number 1, is the work copyright protected? So I mentioned a little bit about public domain, how copyright expires. So if the work is not copyright protected, you can likely use it. Also, are you using a substantial amount from a work? And if the amount is insubstantial, like for example, if it's just a short quote from a large work, you are less likely to need permission for that. And then third, again, we have to think about if there are any terms of use or license agreement terms already that apply to that work that you want to use. So if the license terms explicitly allow what you'd like to do, then you can use it. If the license term prohibit or are silent on the type of use you would like to make, then you're likely to need permission from the copyright owner. And also, if there are no license terms found, if you have just sort of a basic copyright statement, and if it's all rights reserved, permission from the copyright owner is likely to be required. So I have red asterisks because this is my perspective, and again, a journal or publisher may have some different practices or policies if they're on the very kind of risk averse end. I think it's possible that some could even require you to get a copyright permission for a small quote from a book. So that's just something to keep in mind, that things can be different in real life as you go. Okay, so first, figuring out if the work is copyright protected. Most of what you're likely to want to use will be copyright protected, because copyright protection lasts for a very long time. Generally, under Canadian law, most works are protected by copyright for at least 50 years after the death of the creator. And that's actually changing, that's going to change shortly to 70 years after the death of the creator. So if you're working with wanting to use materials from current, or recent books or journal articles, they are likely to be copyrighted. If you're in history and using archival materials like old photos and things, then it may be a bit, you may run into fewer times when you need to be acquiring permissions, but a lot of it is likely to be copyrighted. Also, we're kind of operating here under Canadian copyright law, but if you're publishing in a journal, let's say, that's based out of another country that has an even longer term of copyright, like 90 years after the death of the creator, that could also affect when you do or don't need permissions. I've got a hyperlink here to a Canadian public domain flowchart that was created at the University of Alberta that you can use to kind of follow to determine whether something is copyrighted or not. They have a lot of different types of works on there. So if you need help interpreting it or using it, please do let me know. And also, again, thinking about a threshold of creativity or originality that needs to be met in order for material to be copyright protected. It's likely for use in research and academic publishing that material that you are interested to reuse will meet that threshold. All right. Number 2, am I using a substantial amount? Okay, so I talked a little bit already about short quotations. In cases where a very short quote is from a very short work, like if you're using only 2 lines of text, but it's from a 5-line poem, then that's more likely to be substantial because it's a significant portion of that full work, of that full poem, for example. Generally, using a single image from any source, an image is considered to be a substantial work because, because it can be often kind of a standalone whole copyrighted work on its own, even if it's just one image from a book that contains 100 images or an article that contains lots of images. And the same goes for other types of media. So music or film clips or things, unless a very insubstantial amount is used, a publisher is likely to require you to get permission. Yeah, Merle's saying lots of books use snippets of poetry or song lyrics. I think they do usually ask for permission, even if it's a really small amount. All right, Sam has asked a question. What's the difference between copyright permission and license? Thank you, Sam. I intended to tell you that already and forgot. So I'm very glad that you asked. So I use the terms copyright permission and copyright license fairly interchangeably. However, for me, the big difference, or I tend to use the term copyright permission more often when a rights holder has given permission for free. Copyright license, when I use the term copyright license, usually that has required a fee, a license fee. So copyright permission free, copyright license fee, like they've required a payment in order to provide the allowance to use the work. Yeah. Proper citations do not equal permission, correct? That's correct. Proper citations are extremely important for academic integrity, reasons, right, to ensure that there are no plagiarism issues come up, but it's not, yeah, if you need a copyright permission, that requires having to go to the rights holder, communicate with the rights holder, and do more than just cite the work. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah. Who and how do you ask for permission to use a work? I am gonna, that is the bulk of the second half of my session. So I'm gonna go through that in detail. Sanvi, thank you. Yeah. Okay. And so last for just figuring out if we need permission is how to find terms of use or license terms for a work. So for electronic resources, we can look for terms of use, and for USask library licensed resources, I recommend contacting the e-resources staff there, because some of the university library electronic resources, the licenses for them, I should say, do allow for small portions of published materials to be reused, like in your publications. You can take advantage of that because you're an authorized user, because you're a University of Saskatchewan community member. So this is quite a new thing in these library licenses. We're working now on figuring out how to communicate about that and how to make that information available. But for now, you can ask the library. I'm also always happy to help with finding and interpreting copyright statements and license terms. It's not easy. It can be very challenging. It can be hard enough to find them, let alone interpret what is sometimes written in complex legalese. So, so please don't hesitate to ask for help if you're not sure where to go with it. Yeah, I spend a lot of time looking at electronic resources, looking for words like these to try and find these copyright statements or notices that have the details about what we can do with them. Okay. So I also just sort of wanted to summarize overall what in a table, kind of what types of things you are likely to be required to get copyright permission for versus less likely. So again, this is general guidance, and journals and publishers may feel differently, but okay. So yeah, you're likely to require copyright permission to republish any substantial amount of text, full copyrighted images, so those like all rights reserved images from most sources, particularly, most certainly from print sources, sort of hard copy, unless they're copyright free. And then any other, substantial portions from other types of copyrighted materials. All right. So these are the sort of, it's not totally sure thing. You may have to check existing licenses and also ask your journal or publisher if you can use things. So yeah, images from electronic library materials, you can ask the library. Orphaned works, which I haven't talked about yet. So these are works that Merle was saying that she had some dealings with to republish in her book. These are works that are copyright protected, but there is no discernible copyright holder that can be contacted. So I think Merle's example was photographs, and the photographer had passed away, and it there was no records kind of exactly who she left her copyright to, and she had no family sort of for the estate. So happily, you're not likely to encounter too many orphaned works, and your journal or publisher may have policies about how they manage those types of works. Your journal might also, for images anyway, be open to publishing without you needing additional copyright permissions, images that you've sort of recreated in your own way. So you've drawn yourself based on someone else's image. So if you redraw it and it's kind of different enough than the original, like if it doesn't look just sort of like you've copied it, like drawn a straight copy of it, the journal might publish that without you contacting the copyright owner for additional permissions, again, as long as it's cited, like remaking a map, maybe, yep, like Merle stated. And also materials, there are some materials that it's allowed to use for non-commercial purposes only. So for example, some of the Creative Commons licenses will allow for non-commercial use, but not commercial use. And yeah, so, and that depends also on the journal that you're publishing with. So if it's a really big for-profit journal, might not be able to use material that are restricted to non-commercial only without further copyright permissions. And lastly, okay, again, you're unlikely to require copyright permission, or less likely to, for anything that you're the copyright owner for. So again, yeah, anything that you've created yourself, and anything that's copyright free, insubstantial, or for which there's an existing license attached to the work that allows what you want to do. So like an open access Creative Commons license, one of them that only requires that you cite the work and you can use it for any purpose. Yeah. Okay, that was a lot of information already. So we're gonna have a cute kitty break. This is my cat, Simon, and he thinks we should take just a little pause. Any questions about this at this point? Any questions about this table? Are the consequences of making a mistake on copyright serious or minor? That's really interesting. Yeah. So the consequences depend on what the use or the alleged infringement of the material, like what the nature of the infringement was. So if you were to like accidentally publish one academic image in a journal, like in a nonprofit research journal that you needed permission for, the consequences are not that steep. I think, oh yeah, I'll go to the previous slide. Yes. The consequences are not that steep for a non-commercial infringement. I think the maximum penalty is like a $5,000 fine currently. That's based on Canadian law. Now, if you, on the other hand, if you were like reprinting an entire book and trying to sell it to people, just sort of, or if you kind of posted a whole movie that wasn't yours online and you were having people pay to view it, that's a commercial infringement. So the penalties for commercial infringements are more steep for sure. I can't remember the details, but yeah. Okay, if we wanted to reference a piece of info from a research paper that got the piece of info from somewhere else and referenced it, do we reference the original work or the work you got it from? Yeah, that totally makes sense. So that is an academic integrity kind of, I think, more like avoiding plagiarism question that I'm not an expert on as much. I feel like Merle may more likely know the answer to that. I think It depends on in part on the citation style that you are working in. So if you, I would recommend consulting the most updated citation style guide for your citation style to see what they say about that. Like I remember for example, for APA style, I'm somebody should fact check this, but I'm fairly certain that if you are citing something like secondary in that kind of way, and like for APA, you would in the in-text citation, you would put the in-text citation for the secondary source and then say as cited in, and then the source that you actually read, like the one that the main research paper that you were reading, and then you would just put in the reference list the citation for the main one paper you were reading. I hope that makes sense too. But
Yeah, no, I agree with that. That's usually what I do too. This is Merle. Yeah, so if they've cited it from somewhere else, then it's, I read it here because they might have, maybe given a particular slant to it. So you kind of need to say which one you took it from. But yes, all of the styles have an answer for that, RH. So I put a link in the chat to the library guides from the University of Saskatchewan around academic integrity and citations, and there should be an answer in there, but do check and make sure that it's the correct answer for your particular citation style. I use Chicago because I'm a historian. Lots of people use APA, so find your style and then do whatever that style guide tells you to do.
Right. Okay. I'm going to move ahead because I can tell I'm already getting a little behind, and I'm going to I'll come back to your question I just saw pop in the chat. Thank you for that. All right. So I'm going to quickly talk a little about finding copyright friendly materials, and then we're going to do how do we actually do a copyright permission request? Who do we contact and stuff? So, all right. So these are the 6 Creative Commons licenses. I'm gonna, again, go through them quick because I'm behind already. So, because there's so many great questions. Thank you, everybody, for the great questions. All right. So each of the Creative Commons licenses is made up of some combination of 4 elements. The first element is included in all of them. I call him the little by guy. And this element of the license means that when you use the work, you have to cite who it is by. So you have to include the name of the creator in the citation when you use it, or as a citation. Another element is the non-commercial element, which I mentioned a little bit. And that, if you see that in a Creative Commons license on a work, that means you can only use the work for non-commercial purposes. Okay, this SA means share alike. And what that means is if you were to create an adapted version of the work, like make modifications to the Creative Commons licensed work, you would be required to share your version with a similar or the same Creative Commons license. So the goal of this is just to perpetuate that open access for you to share your work openly as well. And this last one with the equal sign is no derivatives. So that means for ones that have that on it, that means you're not permitted to make derivative versions or modifications of that work. So, all right. So, for example, my slides, I have put a Creative Commons attribution share alike license on. So this would allow people to reuse this work and they can modify it. I just ask that they cite it. And if they create their own version, they also share it with this Creative Commons license. All right. So I'm gonna really go quickly through these, and again, you'll have the slides that you can explore afterwards, how to find copyright friendly images. So there's a YouTube video here about how to filter Google image search for things that are openly licensed using the tools and then selecting Creative Commons for the usage rights. It's always important to still go right to the web page that Google is pulling the image from, so that you can confirm that it is openly licensed. All right. I also have links here to the official Creative Commons search, Wikimedia Commons, where there's a ton of openly licensed resources. And the University of British Columbia Copyright Office also has compiled a really excellent list of like academic, subject-specific online image databases that are copyright friendly, a lot of them. So I highly recommend checking those resources out from UBC. And you can also ask a librarian for your subject area for help. Yeah. Okay, we do not have time to do this example, but if you'd like to do it on your own afterwards or at some point as a little self-test, you would go to this webpage and, okay, really quick, does anybody, if you want to put in the chat, does anybody remember what words we might want to look for? What kinds of words we might want to search for on a web page or an electronic resource to find useful info about who we should contact? Terms of use, yep, absolutely. What else? Permissions, yes. Yep, could be something about open source or open access. Copyright, 100%. Could also look for anything about license, anything about public domain. Yeah, so normally, like what I do if I'm in a, will I get sued? I haven't had as much success with that one, but I'm gonna try next time. So on a web page or in an electronic document, I do the like find a word, like Control F, and I search for copyright, usually first copyright, license, permission, rights, like, and I go through to see if I can find that copyright statement. So, all right, how to get a copyright permission or license. So if you're at this point, you know that the work you want to use is copyrighted, it's substantial, there isn't an existing license like a Creative Commons or library license that will allow you to republish it, and there isn't an open access kind of alternative that you can use. So if we need to get a copyright permission or license, step one is determining who can provide it. So that will be most of the time the copyright owner or an authorized representative. So there are organizations called copyright collectives or collective societies that manage and do administration of copyright permissions on behalf of large groups of like authors or publishers, rights holders. Most of the time working in academic publishing, a lot of what you may be interested to republish may be available through what's called the Copyright Clearance Center. So it is an online copyright clearance center. And I'm going to do a quick example here to show you what the online copyright clearance center looks like. All right. Okay, everybody, can everybody see this CCC marketplace? webpage, I hope?
Yep.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Okay, so this is the Copyright Clearance Center. And I recommend it normally because you can get a copyright permission for many things almost instantly, whereas if you are having to send emails and wait for people to get back to you, it can take quite a long time. So let's say I want to use an image, I want to republish an image from this fair trade organic coffee article about coffee farming families. So I'm going to search here for the article name. All right, and if the Clearance Center can provide the permission for it, potentially, it will come up in the search results here. All right, so on the bottom right hand of that search result, there is something I can click on that says request permission. Then it's going to ask what you need permission to use the copyrighted content in. So for a journal article, like for an academic publication, we're going to select publications. And then it's asking just a little bit about who you are. So I represent, or I am an author, student, or other individual. That's what you would select most of the time there. Yeah, for your research publications. We're going to go next. Okay, now the type of use. So they'll list here the types of usages they could provide a permission for, kind of on behalf of the rights holder. And let's say we want to republish this in a journal or magazine, like in an academic journal. All right. And then now it's wanting all of the details about the portion of the material that you want to republish. So whether it's an image or things like this. So even with the Copyright Clearance Center, like, you know, it takes time to do these permissions requests. So an important tip is to start as early with it as you can. And again, this is something I help folks with all the time. So if you are wanting to use this site and looking for some assistance, please let me know. Yeah. And it also asks here about the new work details. So like your work that you want to republish the material in. Okay. Okay. So if the Copyright Clearance Center doesn't cover the work that you're needing the permission for, again, just look for a copyright statement on it to determine who you need to contact. So do that search for the word copyright. Often the copyright owner name will be placed after, like in that copyright statement that says copyright and then has this copyright symbol, and then it'll say who the copyright owner is and the year of publication. If there is no copyright statement, then the next thing we want to do probably is just in a full citation for the work, it will give you some idea of who to start to contact. For academic publications, I would start by looking, by approaching the publisher. And if that's not possible, you can also try to contact the author because they might be the copyright owner. And in order to do that, you want to contact them in writing so that you can create like a paper trail of your communications, because all of this documentation, all the email communications, any license agreements, license terms, your receipt, if there's a fee, like a copyright license fee, it's important for you to keep a copy of all of those things for your records for that legal proof of permission. Yeah, if contacting publishers, they may have an online copyright permission request form that they've created. So you can check their website for that. Some large publishers have a dedicated copyright permissions email that you can look for as well on their websites. So, And in your request that you write, if it's in the like an email or a letter, and as opposed to a form, just include as much detail as you can about the work that you're wanting to republish and about your new work in which you're wanting to publish it. All right, I already went through this. Always keep a copy for legal proof. Yeah. If you find a photo in an online museum and want to use it, each picture usually costs a fee. It can get expensive. It can. And this is why often we try and encourage like finding these open access resources when you can, or the like copyright friendly Creative Commons resources. Yeah, okay. So this is sort of worst case scenario real quick. Copyright owners, they don't always say yes. They don't have to say yes. It's their right to say, no, we will not provide permission for that use. So happily, it's not very common, but if it does happen, there are some alternatives that you can, ask your publisher about what to do. Like probably just the journal or publisher may have ideas, but sometimes you could include just a citation for that work and a description of it, and just state that it needed to be removed because of copyright. But providing a link or possibly redrawing something if it's an image may work too. Yeah, so this is an example statement like that. This is also from UBC. All right, we have one slide to go, I think. I was remiss not to almost forget to talk about conferences and poster sessions. So yeah, things to keep in mind when it comes to using works in conferences and poster sessions. If you're at a student conference at an educational institution and it's not for profit, you can very, very likely, I think almost certainly, rely on those fair dealing guidelines for what you can use for that. If you are, on the other hand, attending a large, like kind of professional conference or a for-profit conference, it is more likely that you will need to acquire copyright permission to use material there, especially if you are thinking of distributing copies to attendees as opposed to just displaying something. So that's another case where it's more likely that you'll need copyright permission if you want to actually distribute copies or post something openly online than to display it only. So I forgot to put in here about Harvest and institutional repositories that Merle reminded me of. So like if you're doing a poster and interested in using materials on it and it's going to be posted in an institutional repository, that may be, if it's images or text from library e-resources, that may be allowed by the library licenses. So you can ask me or the library about that and we can look into it. But yeah, conference organized may also have guidelines and policies about this. So.
And that's where, for those of you who are going to be in the upcoming SURE Symposium, there's sort of two levels of participation. If you're just going to be creating either a poster or a presentation that's just going to be shared on the Canvas site, which of course we're not going to open it to everyone. You have to have a USask NCID in order to access the site. So that is not considered a public, internet, open kind of a publication, because it's a little bit the same as if you have to actually walk onto campus like you do on August 25th, go into Convocation Hall and look at the poster. And so it's sort of similar in that way. However, we are hoping to cross-post as many of the presentations and posters as we can in our online open Harvest, what do we call Harvest? it's not a resource, it's
Repository.
repository, that's the word, thank you. Yes, so put it into the Harvest repository, and I'll put a link to Harvest. And that's where, like, for example, if you're a historian and you're going to be using images that you've found on the internet, but there might be some licensing and permissions to use that particular image. You would probably be able to use it under the fair dealing guidelines if you were just going to put it on a poster that was going to be showcased just only in Convocation Hall or only in Canvas. But the minute we're going to post it in Harvest, then those guidelines very likely will be slightly different. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to kind of raise copyright as an issue, because if you are interested in posting your research work in Harvest, and I hope that you do, because that means that you're going to have a safe, stable place to share your research outside the academy for a long time, which is great. But you do have to really think through these copyrights. And this is a good opportunity for you to think through those copyrights and maybe get those permissions now. And get that higher level of permission. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, nope, thanks, Merle. That was excellent. I am done too. We have reached the end of our time, 12:01. So thank you again, everyone, for coming. I know this is like, if you have to go, please, yeah, feel free to go on to your next thing. I'm going to hang out though for, if it's okay, Merle, I can stay and answer questions for another 15 minutes. I know there are some questions in the chat that I haven't got to yet. So
that's awesome.
Work?
What I'm going to do is that, yes, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for putting your thanks in the chat. Yes, we will be sending out slides of the presentation for those who registered for today. And I'm going to stop the recording, and then that will give Kate a chance to answer some of the more detailed questions that came in on the chat. Kate, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us in this recording, and I will get it posted on the YouTube channel as soon as it's ready to go.
Great. Yes, thanks again for having me.